Okay, so I have an example, and I'm going to build it right off of what we just talked about today. So this is Popplet, and on our sheet there's going to be some ways to get into Popplet. I'm already in Popplet because I didn't want the technology to fail, and then I'm standing here looking at the wheel of doom while it's not loading, so I wanted to have it preloaded. But what I like about Popplet, and it's not all powerful and it's not going to be right for everybody, but what I like about Popplet is it's easy to use, it's free for the first 5 Popples, or that's what they're called. You can collaborate with someone else, and you can zoom in and out, and it's got a little bit of interactivity so that you can, it's kind of the best way to put it is a really easy interactive whiteboard. So I'm going to start at the top, and I'm going to put at the top here, I'll just slide that Popple up here, and I'm going to call that the qualities. That's going to be my top level. And we had 4 qualities right now. I'm going to turn those guys, and I'm going to make those blue. And the first one, I believe, was motivating and inspiring. The second was...
How are you making those appear?
I double click right into there, and I'll show you guys how to do that.
So you just double click in the space and
it pops up. And that's why it's called Popplet, which is kind of cool.
Okay.
Yeah, motivating and inspiring, and then they were expertise and interest in subject. I'm going to call this guy no children, or know and care about audience. And I think the last one was, I don't even remember. Well, we had 2 more. Risk take innovation and then patience. And if I spell something wrong, I think it catches it, but it's just a draft. So we've got our big qualities. We put those guys at the top. We can drill down a little bit further, and I'm going to make our next level is going to be our learning objectives. And chances are we'd have to spread this out a lot. So you can just grab them and drag them. I'm just going to move these guys out of the way because we're going to work with number 1 here. And we have, what do they need to know? And I will turn this guy, this is learning objectives. And I'm going to turn this guy into learning objective 1. And if we go back here, we said that was going to be what's developmentally appropriate. We said they need to know or be able to think about student stories. And I'm just doing this shorthand. If you were doing this with somebody else or you needed to do it more formally, you could certainly do that. Again, we're going to have to spread, so I'm just going to move that out of the way. Now here's the cool thing about Popplet. You can zoom and get closer, or as we get bigger, we'll be able to examine this as whole to part. It's kind of some old language about learning and how our brains work, but we are going from whole down to part. That's basically what we did today. And then our third learning objective under motivating and inspiring was active listening skills. Now for each quality, you might have a lot more learning objectives, but for our purposes, we're going to keep it small. And then we got down here a little bit further to our next level, and this was our move this guy out of the way. This was and this is automatically recentering itself. We were going to look at learning objective number 1, which is developmentally appropriate. And I'm going to turn this level, this is our topics level. I'm going to turn that guy into, did we get there? Oh yeah. So our topics and methods. This is where we need to have our subject matter expert, and we can say we're going to have them read scholarly article. What that's going to be, that's going to be up to the subject matter experts teaching this class. We might have them listen to a lecture, and I can pull this guy down and make it connect. And all I did, that automatically popped up by pulling this little guy down. We're going to have them do some role playing. I love that idea. How fun would it be to play a kindergartner? I still don't get them, but maybe if I role played a little bit better. And then, we're going to do an observation and a write-up. And as we would be continuing to develop this a little bit further, we might get to the point where, wait a minute, you know what's going to need to happen? In order to do an observation and a write-up, I'm going to need to make a connection here. And just for my own mind, I want to make sure that I'm connecting and they're connecting. And as I'm mapping this out and getting a little bit more complex, if you've ever heard me talk about curriculum mapping before, the lines are just as important as what's in the boxes, because the lines represent how this information or how these pieces or how these topics or how the discipline that you're trying to teach and create this whole quality or this whole person who's leaving your class, that's how we do it, by teaching those connections and by teaching those lines. And not just teaching them accidentally, but teaching them very intentionally and on purpose, basically. And when we map using something like Popplet, those lines are not just in our imagination, like, I have to make sure I reference that, or I need to do that, or I need to help make those connections. I can actually see how I'm going to teach, what I'm going to teach, kind of when I'm going to teach it, maybe not so much here, but I'm also going to be showing that meta piece, like I'm going to be connecting this to this, and I'm going to be helping students connect this so that they have a whole concept or it's a whole idea, or I'm going to be asking questions or helping coach them making those connections themselves, so that you don't have to tell them they connect, you can just start hinting that they connect. Can they make the connection themselves? So they're practicing doing that kind of thinking. And by doing that, we're not only teaching them these things, but I would argue you're teaching them how to think like, in this case, a teacher, making those connections and always having those things on our mind. So doing it intentionally and mind mapping intentionally adds that secondary layer of not just knowing how to do something or the skills independently, but as part of a discipline or part of a whole concept.
Margene, on that line between active listening and
Yes.
observations, there's a little dot there.
That is, I'm going to zoom back in. If I didn't like that line, like, oops, I didn't want that. That dot is an X. I can
Oh, it's an
delete it.
X to get rid of it, okay.
Yep.
How easy is it to put a box in between those, or does that, so can you label the lines, I guess is what I'm asking.
No, you can't label the
Okay.
lines. So that's the other thing. Popplet's a great mind mapping, really easy, really simple. What it can't do is you can't get too complicated with it. You can't get away from the squares. You can't, it's not a flow chart thing.
Got it.
You can't get away. There's limited colors. There's limited sizes and things you can do. One of the coolest things you can do, and I'll just make a Popplet down here. So kind of just how to use the technology. Once you get in there, you make a Popplet by double clicking. You can make it bigger. You can make it smaller. You can connect automatically a Popplet by dragging, and they have these cool little coaching marks that are called coach marks, where it tells you what to do with it. So I can click on that, drag it over here, and there's a new Popplet. Let's say I want to color code them a little bit. There's not that many colors to choose from, but there's enough. So I'm going to turn this guy orange. I might actually want to make that bigger, and if I had some skills with the mouse, I could draw something in here, so it's kind of like a little whiteboard, like hi.
So does this work on iOS or on tablets?
It does.
So
Both.
that would,
You can get, there's an app for that.
okay.
People can collaborate, so rather than changing notes, you can add Popplets, but you can also make comments right here. So this is a comment that I could add to here. And this guy right here, this is what I think makes it kind of special, and what might make it a really cool student activity, because students could do these Popplets too. We're talking about it for like curriculum development, but just to broaden it. I can add an image, a Vimeo, a YouTube, or I can add a file from my computer. So as you're going, I could actually insert like a PDF right there so that I remember, oh, that's the actual article I want to use. So you can really do a lot of organization that way.
And it'll adjust to the size of this.
I think it's a small, I don't know, I have actually never done that.
But I mean, it adjusts on its own, you don't have to.
Yes, it does some adjusting on its own. I have lots of screenshots. I wonder what that is.
Margene, I noticed that your name is every place up there.
It is, and that's because it is collaborative software. So up here, I can share it, but I can also have a collaborator so that you know who added which Popplet. And there's actually no way to get rid of that, but
So I could set something up for my students and say, you have to add 2 things to it, and I know who added what.
yep, and you can't edit that. So
I can't.
nobody can edit it. Once they're logged in and they set it in there, they can't change who put the Popple in. The other person, I should say, the other person could delete it if they were mean or something like that.
So if I set it up, I can have some control over content that comes in?
Not really. Well, other than who your collaborator is, but your collaborator adds whatever they want. But if, let's say, it was inappropriate and it was a Popple that you made as the teacher and you had established these are the guidelines, don't add inappropriate things, you can go there and delete it.
Okay.
So if I'm collaborating with somebody, I can go delete their Popples. Just like a Google Doc, you can delete and do things like that. One last thing, and this is on the Boss Challenge down here. I had a hard time coming up with a Boss Challenge, as we call them, the hard ones, because this is super simple, easy software. It's not super complex, but you can share it. If you wanted to make a Popplet or share it out and tweet it out or Facebook it out, you might say, why would you use that? Well, if you're teaching like in a high school and you have a parent group that likes to see the assignments, you can share that out and kids go home and brag about what they did. You can embed it, so you can embed it in a blog. You can't embed it in a WordPress blog, but you can embed it in a Google blog, which is called a blogger. And any other thing that takes HTML for the most part. And you can create a link, so you can share a link to your Popplet. Your Popplet is public but not searchable unless you share the link, or it's public but not searchable, you can share the link. You can also make this Popplet public so anybody can look at it or see it. Maybe not edit it, but can see it, so you can publish them.
So this is Flash-based? Does the output come?
It is Flash-based, and for the non-techies in the room, Flash is kind of an older thing, and some browsers, some programs don't really like it.
Well, but there's also an iPad version of its own called Popplet Lite.
Mm-hmm.
So
That
that's obviously not Flash because
Nope.
iPad doesn't support Flash. So
Right. I don't know what that is, but it works. I have it on my iPad.
So does the output? Is it just the editor that's Flash-based, or is the output also Flash-based?
It's live. This is the output.
Okay.
So that's, I don't know.
Interesting.
You can also here do a little bit of organizing. You can add some content, kind of the same stuff. You can use it as a presentation device. It's kind of dizzying, kind of like, You can export it as a PDF or a PNG or a JPEG, and then print it as a big poster. I've done that before. And you can play with these guys too. I haven't tried the different languages, but you can, I guess, put them into these different languages, which is cool. So that's kind of where I'm at today, and let you guys play. I didn't spend a huge amount of time because there's just not a huge amount of time to worry about Popplet that much. But again, I wanted to spend most of the time conceptualizing how do you do curriculum design in kind of a slapdash way.
Do you have any examples that you can show of fully designed?
Curriculum?
Yeah.
Don't have an example of fully designed curriculum, but I do have. That's a curriculum map. It's kind of messy, so I wasn't going to show you that, but I will show you how I used it for a Scandinavian studies example. And it was, she already had the learning objective. So what we were looking at was Popplet on a really big, broad basis. But when the instructor came to me, she already had learning objectives. She just didn't know how she wanted to achieve it. So this is drilling down even further. And we have this learning objective. I'm sorry about that. I don't want to zoom in too much. This learning objective, it's about fairy tales, that students are going to be able to identify common patterns in fairy tales and folklore. And this class is about Hans Christian Andersen. And she had defined the topics already in the learning objective she wanted to cover. Tale types, character type, and elements of the marvelous. So I put it over here and said, okay, that's what we want to achieve. And then I broke it down on a topic level. Here's what needs to go into that learning objective. We have these topics. So these are the parts of the learning objective. By doing this, the instructor also identified right here, she had been teaching that in this lecture. It was a lecture. She wanted to get away from lectures. She had been trying to smash in background and bios of famous authors of fairy tales, as well as collectors of fairy tales. She realized that didn't really go with that learning objective. So by doing that, she decided to take that out and put it as an online module students needed to look at on their own. So over here, came down to, I said, all right, so let's talk about, you want to get away from lecturing. Let's talk a little bit about how you want to do that. And as we were talking, she was able to break down, oh, it's not the concept of plot. I actually have to teach these two ideas, these two subtopics, in order for students to fully understand plot in this context. And the way I'm going to do that is she's going to do for here, do a close read example for the students. And then over here, she was going to ask the students to do their own close read together and bring it back to the group. So that's the methods line. So if we were going to plot this out on the entire curriculum, up here, you would have the qualities of the students you want to leave. Up here across this whole thing, you'd have all those learning objectives mapped out. And so you can see how this would get really big, really quick, which is fine because you can get really small and zip in there. Down here, and I'm not sure if this is helpful either, but down here I'm going to zoom in a little bit. We can get even tighter and say, you know what, I don't need to do this for a curriculum. I'm only in charge of one lecture or one lesson, or I have 45 minutes to do a workshop or an hour like today. I can say I'm going to use this for design on a very small, very discrete level. So I've got my learning objectives. For me, I always ask the question, what do my students need to know? How are they going to apply the knowledge? I know they need to know these 3 topics. And I know I'm going to use these 3 methods to get to those topics. So a lecture, some readings, and some guided research, which is what I call, you go research this topic, and we'll talk about the process of researching too. Not research like, let's run an experiment. if it were, over here are some examples of how you might apply it, methodologies like lab, writing, discussion. So you can get as discrete or as broad. You can smash it all into one Popplet or make it smaller or bigger. It's just a matter of when you're, in my mind, obviously this is, backwards design is a hierarchy, and you can make and the way my brain works, you can make an outline with all the hierarchical indentations and things like that to show what belongs to what. We all know how to do hierarchies. But that's the way my mind works, but that only works in a linear way. It doesn't work in a vertical way, so you can't see the entire class, or I'm sorry, in a horizontal way. It really works only vertically. So you can't see, you can see one thing and the depth and the methods at which you're going to teach it, but you can't see the breadth of the other things and how they fit together. And that's why I like mind mapping, because you can combine the two. You can do your depth and your breadth, which is, depth and breadth is the basics of curriculum design. What you're going to teach, how much you're going to teach of it, and when you're going to teach it. All right, do you guys get to play it all?
Yeah. It keeps logging me out.
I know, that's the Java part. Wait, is it Java in Flash? I kind of may not know what I'm talking
It
about.
might be. Java is also being deprecated.
Yeah, so, but it's not going away anytime soon.
But I like the using this type of a thing for curriculum design, using backwards design, starting off with what is it that you want, the qualities you want your students to leave with, and then what are the things that they need to learn, know, and to do in order to, that's the evidence section. I like the rephrasing of evidence as what do they need to learn, do, know. And then finally, what activities support them learning, doing, and knowing that.
Right, and as things become more complex, obviously the topic of child development for an elementary school student, and you're going to narrow it down to maybe third grade, that is not, that has many, many subtopics involved in it. We made it really small, or we made it really broad today. But you can get this, it's implied, exactly. But you can really be intentional about the topics you're going to teach and not miss anything. I find that's especially important if you're teaching something for the first time, mapping it out a little bit. Making no assumptions that they know or have background knowledge or prerequisite knowledge to understand that. So for me, mind mapping is what it is. It's mapping thinking and making something that's abstract.
Well, to tie back to your first questions of how do we know what they know, you could ask them to create their own mind map on whatever the topic is, and I imagine that if you look at, your class 30 examples of what they know on the topic, you could probably quickly pick out some patterns.
Yeah.
That would help you as far as formative feedback on what to teach next or how to teach differently.
Yeah, I think mind mapping can be used in many different ways. Today it was my way of doing curriculum design, which I think is slapdash.
Consider almost doing your syllabus in this form.
I think it'd be awesome.
I was just thinking I could teach from this better than an outline, and the syllabus is kind of an outline. I like what you're saying.
Last semester, Nick Balster talked about scaffold for curriculum design, and so that video of how he used that, he takes the whole outline that he does for the semester and puts it into this style, not quite using backwards design as I recall, but as far as what topics he needs to talk about, what the resources are, and he can just kind of visually drive through that each week and pick and choose, what resources, it feels like the class needs this resource, but not this resource. So that lets him be very improvisational in some ways, but have those resources back.
Responsive.
Yeah, responsive to what they require.
I think we have a link or an image of his curriculum on the page.
On the activity
last
sheet.
night. Yeah, and it's like, and he didn't want to give us the whole file because it's like massive and his, so that's fine.
And so we made it very small, so you
So
can't
it's-
read it, but you get the idea.
So you can't read it, but you can see like how detailed it's mapped out, and he's got different levels for activities, it seems like, and it's very cool. Because then he can drop something on there and be like, I know I want to include this somewhere, but I don't know where, but
Oh,
it's
I can
on
find
there.
it.
And then when I figure out where to place it, then I can move it.
It's kind of directed in the right location, yeah.
And images, do you have links in there too?
Yeah,
I feel like?
and all of those, because it's infinitely zoomable, or as infinite as these things become, he can put a whole image on there and then just zoom right into it, so, and then he can actually just project it on the screen.
Mhm.
So not only can you drive with it, but it's almost this interactive. It's like a slide deck of 1,000 slides where you can just sort of, but they're slides that aren't just one big grid of slides. They've got lines connecting them, so you can say, all right, this slide, these slides are part of this concept.
So more like a Prezi than like
In some ways, it was more.
Yeah,
it was a lot
I
like
use
Prezi.
Prezi for mind mapping too.
Yeah, because you can have like the whole image and it shows up tiny, but then you really can't zoom in and see the whole thing.
What's interesting to me is that as we're having this conversation and looking at it as a teaching device too, there's a big trend toward gamification or what have you. But I always think of video. This could be almost like the journey your class is going to be on, and showing them the actual pathway, and it becomes not only again what you're going to be learning, but how you're going to be thinking about it and how those things connect, which I think is just as important. As we lose like the factual knowledge because we don't necessarily need it or apply it, but how to think about something and how to visualize a discipline or the problem solving or the skills in the discipline, that to me is what creates our lifelong learners, our problem solvers. Being able to have the mind skills to do that. Yeah.
Do they have circles?
They don't. It's only that. But to that effect, Prezi is a good.
But yeah, Prezi does, Scapple does, Prezi. Can you open that up?
Yeah. I have to.
You probably have 1,000 things on Prezi as well,
I
right?
have lots.
Is there an advantage to one or the other?
This is simply even more. This is pretty simplified. Prezi, you can get a little bit more. Sorry, I was doing code, or I'm not. I'm trying to learn code.
And we'll put a link to Nick Foster's
Sure.
workshop in the page for this one, and you have the page at the top of your handout.
Why do I have-
Not the active teach bit.ly, but the other bit.ly off to the right.
I have tons.
Because we have a list there, I think, of a bunch of other tools.
You have so many resources that we just call on you and you're like, okay.
What was that, John?
I said I love
Oh,
how
just
Margene was
me.
like, can you show us an example of Prezi? She's like, which of my 500 Prezis should I?
Oh, here's one about differentiation in technology.
So Prezi was designed as a presentation tool, but I think that it actually becomes,
That's not a good.
it's almost better as a mind mapping tool than it is as a presentation tool.
Yeah, because presentations get really dizzying. Sorry, that one's
Yeah,
not the
yeah.
best one. What do I have for mind mapping?
It'd be interesting to use a Popplet to
Oh.
make connections between all the topics that have been at the AT lab so far.
Oh,
Like
that would
maybe
be interesting.
categories and.
Yeah.
So this is a Prezi, and it's also, again, just a free online software. Oops, sorry. I don't want it. I just want to see it. Here we go. And some people think it's very dizzying, but this was some design that I did for something called a conversation I was having with an instructor, and she's doing diversified organic vegetable farming, and she's an agronomist. And so she thinks about people in her major as agronomy and maybe plant pathology. She was saying, well, I want to get students in from, other majors. She meant plant pathology so not just agronomy. I said, but let me make a map for you to see how you could think about this in a bigger way. You've got the College of Life Sciences, but there's also people in letters and science, human ecology, and even the School of Education that might really like to learn about diversified organic farming, even the School of Social Work. So I use this as a mind map to show, hey, people who are in soil science, plant path, biological systems, horticulture, and agronomy might like this, but colleges of letters and science also has this thing called botany, but you're talking about organic vegetable on a small scale urban farms. Man, that fits with social work and welfare, especially those people who are studying food deserts. And she's like, what? I'm like, yep, social workers. School of Education, you've got your secondary people who are doing a broad field science degree, and School of Human Ecology, there's people who are already studying this in a different way, but you've got community and nonprofit leadership, that's a group, and then you've got consumer science, and on that, food security, food production, and consumption. So here's a mind map. I'm using Prezi as a mind map for that.